Go.
Hello and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Lara Ehrlich, and our guest tonight is Elana Bell. Writer Mother Monster conversations are streamed live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and then released as an audio podcast on all major platforms. As always, please chat with us during the interview, and your comments will appear in our broadcast studio. We'll weave them into our conversation. And a special thanks to our sponsors and patrons listed on the Writer Mother Monster website. Your support helps make this show possible. So if you enjoyed the episode, please become a patron or patroness to help keep the podcast going. Look for details at writermothermonster.com. Now, I'm excited to introduce Elana. Elana Bell is the author of Mother Country, poems about motherhood, fertility, and mental illness. Her debut collection of poetry, Eyes, Stones, was the winner of the 2011 Walt Whitman Award from the Academy of American Poets. Elana brings her complex heritage as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors to consider the difficult question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She is the recipient of numerous grants and fellowships and was an inaugural finalist for the Freedom Plow Award for Poetry and Activism from Split This Rock, an award that honors a poet who is doing transformative work at the intersection of poetry and social change. Elana is also a sound practitioner and creative guide, teaches at the Juilliard School, and sings with the Resistance Revival Chorus. She's also the founder of the Mother-Artist Salon. Elana has an almost 7-year-old son and describes writer motherhood in 3 words as messy, imperfect, vital. Now join me in welcoming Elana. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much, Lara. It's so exciting to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. I know we've been talking about it for a while. So it's finally come. So, Elana, let's start by talking about those 3 words you used to describe writer motherhood. And again, I'm just looking them up. Messy, imperfect, and vital.
What do you want to know about them? What don't you already know about them?
I know. Go ahead.
I think imperfect is one that is like kind of a constant. I think like anything, before becoming a mother, I might have had an idea about what being a mother would be. And in my idea, there was always a sort of perfection to it, as like most things that live in our mind are. And in reality, it is not that, it is many things, many beautiful things, but also many messy things. And even now, I think like it's really different now than when he was first born. That was sort of the hugest shock to my identity. It was like I was one, and then I was the mother of one and mother of myself and my books. And it was just a huge identity shift. And then, but now as like I have an almost 7-year-old and am constantly being mirrored for me, my imperfections through the lens of my son. So and the challenges change, but they're definitely, and yet there's also this that when I say vital, it is to me just the whole process. From giving birth to all the aspects of motherhood, there's a vital, I think it's hard to redefine the word, but it's just like that sense of aliveness and life itself in a very gritty, full on bloody primal space and state.
Yeah. Oh, I love those words to describe motherhood. I think that's so true. Definitely in birth, but even throughout, children growing up, there's bloody, it's
dirt, mud.
Yes, all the things.
Screaming.
Absolutely. And I love, so imperfect is a word I think that we all grapple with as writer mothers. And where do you think that expectation that we need to be perfect comes from? Or where do you feel it coming from?
Perfect probably looks different to every human. I think for me, before I gave birth, for example, like perfect looked like a home birth in water with like, having an orgasm, where for somebody a perfect birth might have been like hospital, But whatever I thought and envisioned it to be, it was like the exact opposite of that. And I think, so I think we get these, I think this is the pain of being human. It's like we get ideas, they become fixed. We want things to be a certain way. We strive for them, and in it, we miss what's actually really happening. And I think motherhood also, I do think, allows you to release perfectionism in a way. I mean, in a sense, I've had to do that so many times over and over, in many ways, like each aspect of my being, things that I had complete control over, or not, you never actually have complete control. That's an illusion, but more control over than since, before having a child. I had to just let go again and again of like every idea of who I thought I was. Not every idea, but like, pieces and aspects of who I thought I was, and how I thought I did things, I mean, the simplest example is like, I have to teach a class. I'm a professor. I have to teach a class. My husband's out of town for business. My son gets sick. I have to cancel my class. I'm a person who would never cancel a class. I would never miss with my students, and so it's a reminder of how we don't have control actually, like, and what we think of as, I guess it's a reminder of the truth, which is that control is an illusion, and having a child, I think, just makes it clearer to you sooner that it's illusion. Other things do that too, right? Like death does that, illness does that, big losses, divorce. I mean, there's major life things that can shatter your illusion of control, but I think that motherhood is one of them.
Oh yeah, definitely. How does it feel when you have to release perfectionism and realize that you don't have control in motherhood? I think it's probably different when we're talking about illness or death, but in terms of motherhood.
I think it depends on the specific exact context. Like in some ways, like now I'm much more easygoing. And by the way, I extend a deeper grace to other people now who, like, somebody needs to cancel something or shift something. And I'm much more like, cool, it doesn't fluster me, or, it doesn't upset me in the same way that it might have, but when I have to deal with imperfection in terms of like my imperfections, when I see them reflected back to me through my son's eyes, it's extremely painful, it's very painful, I think.
Tell me more about that, about the reflection of imperfection through your son's eyes.
So an example might be, I'm just really going to embarrass myself here.
No, that's go ahead.
So, my son he's a very strong-willed and has a very strong sense of sovereignty. He does not like to be told what to do whatsoever. I mean, when I say not like to be told what to do, he doesn't like to be told it's time to go to school. It's like he puts up a fight with almost anything, which is really exhausting as a parent. And I'm not the most patient person. It's something that's an element of that I'm very imperfect in and would strive to be more so. And so, this one time, I mean, he just, so one time we were leaving for school and, he was not coming and not cooperating. And I lost my temper and I yelled and I was like, we got to go. And like, you don't get to listen to your iPad in the car. And he was like, I hate you. You're the worst mom. And then he said, oh gosh, I'm really going to out myself here. He said, this is good. It's called Writer Mother Monster. So you get to see the monster part.
Yeah.
So he said to me, he's like, I wish you weren't part of this family. And like, as the mature adult, I should have been like, okay, honey, I hear that you say that. And like, but I said, oh, really? You wish that? Why don't you say it 3 times and maybe it'll come true? And he said it 3 times. It was like, and then I dropped him off at school and I said to him, I said, hey, that doesn't feel good the way we left things. I don't want us to leave things like that. And he said, it's okay, Mom. I'm going to go to school and forget all about you. And so it's like, I've met my match for sure. And then when he came home later that day, obviously like our day had gone on, I had calmed down. I'd done my practices to like be a better, be more anchored and grounded. And when I saw him that, after school, I said, honey, aren't you glad I'm still here? I'm still part of the family. He goes, aren't you glad I let you stay? So I definitely, my son is like, really knows how, as I'm sure with your kids, know how to give it to me in a way that like presses my buttons that like nobody else probably could do. I cried to my husband the other night. I was like, I have never in my life worked so hard for somebody and gotten so little appreciation.
Oh
Who
yeah.
designed this job?
Oh,
But
totally.
that's like, I mean, obviously that's the really hard parts. And then like today he comes into my bed and cuddles me and just like, you know, and I get to hold his little body and still get to smell it, which is like my favorite thing. And his little hair on his back. And I just like, oh my God, this creature like came out of my body. And like, it's so crazy. Like, it's just so crazy. Like I'm an artist, you know, not just a writer. I'm an artist and multidisciplinary. I've created many things. And like, nothing is so miraculous to me as this like living, breathing being, and no one drives me as crazy. My books don't talk back to me. My books love me and they never complain and they think I'm the best mom ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I know. And it's hard to please kids. I imagine, especially at that age. My daughter is almost 6, so a little behind yours.
Close. You're very
Close. Yeah, and so I'll spend a day like trying to have a magical like mommy daughter day, and at the end she'll be like, "That was the worst day ever. That was the worst day of my life." I'm like, "Oh," because like she didn't get like one thing that she wanted or something. So yeah, a lot of work for very little recognition,
Right.
but big reward, I guess.
Yeah.
You know. But tell me a little bit about the loss of control and imperfection and how that played out in your work. Did you see a change in your craft?
Well, I had to shift my practice for sure. I think I was the kind of writer. So my husband and I are both writers, but he's a novelist. I'm a poet. He also has a wonderful day job, which allows us to have a roof over our heads. But we work very differently. And so like he sets aside, you know, he wakes up at 5 a.m., writes for 2 hours and like is very productive. That's not my process. And I've had to make peace with that. That just isn't how I create. So it can take me a long time. And I used to, before my son was born, I would go on residencies, you know, for 2 weeks to a month, at least once a year. And that was a hugely productive time for me because it was non-linear productivity. So it was like, I wasn't like sitting down at my desk and like I have to sit for 8 hours. It's like, I could go on a walk and I would like get ideas, or I'd think of a book and I'd order it and I'd spend the day reading, or I'd masturbate and then I'd get a brilliant idea and like write, you know, so it was like a very like non-linear process. And just in me, there's been this thing with both of my books, just a knowing that they would come to be and a trusting in that, like, and not a pressure. You know, there's other areas of my life where I put a lot of pressure on myself, but my poetry is not one of them. I really trust the process. I have mentors like Carolyn Forche, who's like a book a decade, honey. So I have models of people who are, you know, in my opinion, you know, some of the best people writing today who don't feel a pressure to produce at a certain rate. And so I've been that way in the same way. Now, after having a child, I haven't been on a residency in almost 7 years. And so one of the things that changed, I also used to only write longhand ever. So I'm Jewish. I talk with my hands.
Yeah, I do too. And so am I. You're good.
But so I used to only write longhand, and I would write, you know, in my, is that whiskey?
Yes, it is.
Oh, you're such a genius. I didn't even think of that. You should have told me that in the guest notes. So anyway, I would like write every poem, like, you know, spend days and days like writing it until it came through and writing drafts of it. And when I had my son, I just didn't have like 3, 4, 5 hours at a time to devote to writing. So I created this notes in my notes in my phone, this document that was called Mommy Journal. That's what it was first called. And I would write these little things that would come to me, you know, and I would just, I'm like, that's my sign language for text, for like writing in my phone. And I would, and that actually, those notes, of course, then I did print them out and work through revisions, but those became the last poem, which is called Afterbirth now in Mother Country. So actually, which is a very long prose poem. And so it was a real shift, and that was a letting go of perfectionism, right? It was like, well, either like if I can't go on a residency, that's not available to me now because there are very few residencies that allow children. There are some now, actually, which I think is wonderful. But even still, if I'd had my son with me and had to breastfeed and put him to sleep, it would have not been the same thing anyway. And so I had to just let go of some of my perfectionism in my process and change aspects of my process.
Yeah. So I know that's a long poem, but this might be a moment. Do you want to read some of it? Or if not
Sure.
that one, we can
Yeah.
read a different one, but
No, I'm happy to read it.
okay.
Yeah. So this is called Afterbirth, and I'll just
I'll learn
read,
to
I guess.
solo you. Oh, sorry.
What's that? Oh, okay.
Said I'll make you.
I am living outside of time and space as I have known it. When I walk through my neighborhood streets in early evening with my son strapped to my chest, I watch the other people going about their tasks, returning from work or school, carrying groceries or collecting the mail. It feels as though I am watching a world to which I no longer belong. My husband comes home from a day at the office and complains about how tired he is, then swoops down to kiss and cuddle and coo the baby. He does not touch me. He does not ask how I am, only how the baby is, how many times the baby has pooped, spit up, cried. Finally, he turns to me. You don't drink enough water, he says with concern. Motherhood, the cloak over my eyes, my mouth. Sometimes I prefer the pump to his mouth. The pump never cries. The pump never rejects my breast, even if my supply is low. Two of my best friends breastfeed their babies on the bright lawn of the botanical garden. Their breasts swing like globes of fruit. I pull out my small breasts and feed my son for a few short moments before he starts to cry, and I pull out the bottle. My breasts fill with shame. Wanting to be pregnant was about my experience, how empowered I would feel carrying a child, pushing it through the narrow canal, how after that I would be able to do anything. I felt beautiful with my pregnant belly. I loved when people gave up their seats on the subway. I was Earth Mother, goddess, bearer of new life. I read half a dozen books on giving birth. I didn't read a single one about what happens after. When I said I wanted a child, it was in the abstract. Having a child is not abstract. It is true. Sometimes I leave the baby in the rocker swing after he started to cry just so I could put a dish in the sink or pee or drink a glass of water. It is true. I have thought about throwing the baby out the window. I have thought about covering its mouth only so it stops crying for a second so I could think. I could not have known what it would feel like to hold this creature asleep on my chest, his tiny fingers hooked to my skin, his body across mine, tiny buttocks, legs curled like a frog's, the soft hair on his back and arms, and the smell of him. I am drunk on it. In one dream, I have left my infant son at Barnes and Noble. When I come back, he has curled up and made a nest on top of the shelves where I need a ladder to reach. In another, I turn my back to speak to someone, and when I turn back, he is gone. Someone tells me he's gone down to the river. When I get there, he's on the bank, bluish pale and not breathing, but I give him my air and he shudders back to life. I am grateful, so grateful. I love to change my son's diaper. I love to watch his anus open like a tiny mouth and release the waste. I lift his meaty legs and wipe his bottom, apply the oily cream, then wrap the whole thing up in clean white cloth. It provides a sense of accomplishment that little else about mothering does. Leaving the house for my 6-week checkup with the midwives, I lie about how long it will take so I can stop at my favorite cafe and linger over a cup of coffee and a magazine, and no one expects me home. Before I was a mother, I was a woman who came and went as she pleased, who took her time picking out roses, who tried on dresses she could not afford, who talked about books and ideas, whose body belonged to herself and the men she opened to, who answered to nobody, who traveled the streets of India or Bali or Cuba in search of a particular stone or delicious meal or conversation with a stranger which would lead her to the next jewel. She strung them together and wore them like a necklace. Before I was a mother, I was a poet. I lay in bed on Saturday mornings reading for hours. I walked through the city gardens and in the streets with no particular destination in mind. I read my poems in bars where hunger and desire flooded our mouths, where we stood up when the words sliced through our thin costumes. where we drank and danced until 2 a.m. with the workday hanging over us. There were no children there. I lived in the land of no children. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's beautiful and very powerful. So something that you mentioned earlier, and it sort of came out in this poem a little bit, is the linearity. Is that a word? Maybe I made it up. The linear mode of writing. And I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about the patriarchal model of writing and art making. And that only works if you're writing in a linear fashion, if you can work alone undisturbed for long stretches, versus the model, maybe matriarchal model of women and of mothers whose work is happening, as you said earlier, happening alongside other passions and responsibilities. So tell me a little bit about that.
I think the first time I encountered sort of a rage about this was before I was a mother. It was actually, I'm sure you've heard of and probably read Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, he advises the young man that he's, looking at his poems and giving him advice. He says, like, if you try everything else, and if the only thing you can do is write, and if all you're meant to do is write, then you are a writer. Otherwise, you're not. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the gist. And even at that time, I was not that kind of writer. Even at that time, I sang and I acted and I did other things and I was in community and I wasn't like only solely, like arrow focused, which kind of models the male orgasm, like, like that unidirectional on my writing. And it felt like I was being dismissed. Like it was like there was no room for a multi-hyphenate artist of any kind or just someone who didn't work in that fashion. So I remember just being like, this is bullshit, And then as I, after having a child, forget it. And actually, in terms of like all the disciplines, writing is actually probably the most generous to like mothers, because if you think about in the visual arts, or in our theater or musician, where you have to tour, it's even more difficult. And I just, and then I remember someone asked Lucille Clifton once, who is one of my favorite poets, why are your poems so short? She was like, I got 6 kids, got to write them on them. It's like just a different, but it just also struck me like there's a different way of like, and also I think, and believe me, I love my residencies. I love to go away and like be undisturbed. I dream about the days that will happen again. And I think it's not going to be too long. And now my son's in school. So, I have time to do stuff when he's at school, but, there's like, you also miss a lot of what might make you a writer. It's like, I'm also in even writing a book like Mother Country, which is talking about my experience, as a mother, as a new mother, about, which is a lot about releasing ideas that you have and like moving into the actual reality. All of that subject matter is because of my son, so it's like, he is also my inspiration. He is also teaching me, about, and I think of like, I don't want to be an artist who just shuts myself up in a room or ignores the world. Like I want to be a writer and an artist who is in the world, who can integrate, that. And I remember there's many like feminist press and kitchen table press, and there were many collectives and other models, of being a writer, being an artist. And again, I'm not saying that Rilke's is the only model. I'm just saying that like, that was sort of the idea that one had and one was given about what it meant to be a serious artist of almost any discipline, but certainly of writing or painting or something like that. And I think that is one model, but I don't think it's the only one. And I think there are plenty of artists who are changing that narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the way you articulated that. And that's what this show is all about, is finding different models for specifically writer mothers, but just women in general, because as you said, that patriarchal model is the one that's handed down to us when we decide or realize that we are writers. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to kind of to follow that model in today's world, I think for anybody really, but especially for women. So,
and especially if you're a mother, right? So then
especially,
a lot of people just give up, or they feel like they have to choose, like either I'm going to be a good mother or I'm going to be a writer. I can't do both,
Mhm.
and I think that's a shame. And I think that also has to do with the larger question of like, how do we think about, like, first of all, how do we value motherhood as an actual
Mhm.
job and the
Yeah.
labor that's involved, and fatherhood for those fathers who are like making that their primary vocation. But I just, it's like a whole conversation. And then also a conversation about children. Do we want to include children actually more into the fabric of life? Because in like New York, that just isn't a thing, It's like, how often are children welcome at readings or at, other kinds of, they're not really, unless it's specific. You would have to find a very unique, especially if they're happening at bars all the time. And, and there should be that also. I believe in like adult only time,
Sure.
but, there are other countries and other places where children are more included. And I think that impacts the way that they interact with things, because if your child is used to going to readings, I have a mentor and friend, Cheryl Boyce Taylor, who didn't have a choice. And she brought her son she used to do theater as well as poetry. And she brought her son to every rehearsal. Well, her son became, her son Malik Taylor became Fife Dog of Tribe Called Quest. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think the things are unconnected. He's passed away since from an illness. But those kinds of things, it's like it's a different way of thinking about both. Well, that is, parenthood in general. And how do we include our children, or do we want to actually make space for our children to be integrated into those practices and experiences?
Yeah, and actually that's something I've heard from a lot of guests, is that integration and the bringing their kids to readings and telling their kids, I'm writing right now. Why don't you, sit near me and you can work on something while I work on my writing or whatever. But I feel like that wasn't common in the generation before ours. I feel like there's a very big distinction between like work parent and home parent. And now, especially with the pandemic, that's kind of blasted that distinction to pieces. But yeah. So I'm going to switch gears completely for a second and ask you. I'm just scrolling up to find this. So in your bio, you note that you bring your heritage as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Can you tell me a little bit just about your family history? That's so fascinating and challenging. So we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and that, and that I'm referring specifically to Eye Stones, which was my first collection. So I grew up. My ancestry on my mother's side is Polish. My grandmother and grandfather were both survivors. My grandfather was about 17 years older than my grandmother. He'd had a wife and 2 children who were killed in the Holocaust, and they knew each other from the town that they grew up in Łódź, but they re-met, I think, in Germany after the war. And it was kind of like they started a family out of, not like, it wasn't like romance, it was like familiarity, I think. But then they grew to, I think, love each other deeply and had my mom and my aunt. And my grandmother had been a Zionist in Poland, at the time, where in the 30s in Poland, it was like pretty rough for Jews then. It was pre-Hitler, but Poland was no walk in the park. There were pogroms and other things. And so she wanted to leave and wanted to go to what was then Palestine, and really was a big, that was very important to her. And she always said that her hope to go to Palestine, which would eventually become Israel, was like what kept her alive in the concentration camps. After the war, they went there briefly, but then it was very difficult. Actually, they were not friendly towards Holocaust survivors in the early stages of the statehood of Israel. It was actually, there was a lot of sort of discrimination. Again, they were like seen as weak. That there was a new model of Jew that they were trying to create in Israel, which was like the Sabra, which was like, like kind of hardy and, worked the land. It was very different. It was a socialist Modal, and that was kind of what they were trying to. So anyway, long story short, my grandparents left and came to Los Angeles. My grandmother always regretted that. So I became fascinated, and I had never had a real interest in Israel. And then I went in my 20s and really deeply fell in love with the land, and had to kind of hold that alongside being part of a very left-wing, artistic community in New York. And so I was holding both of those things inside, and it was very painful and very confusing. And I felt like, I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't feel like I had a space to talk, but I felt like there was no space also for the narrative of what I'd grown up with. And so I realized at that point that I could either just like shut down on either stop, just totally divorce myself from this love for this land and this place, or I could, stop being in the community that felt absolutely right to me and social justice minded in a way that resonated. And so instead I was like, how can I get curious? And I just started I was like, why is this land so important to so many people? And at the time I thought I would do like an oral history project. So I started interviewing people, and then that led to, going on trips in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, and just like actually getting to experience in Hebron and meeting Palestinians and sharing meals and staying in their homes, and like really seeing a whole other side that I had not had access to. And I think, Elizabeth Alexander says many things are true at once, and Whitman says we contain multitudes. And so I think the job of a human, but like certainly of an artist, is to hold paradox and to hold complexity and to hold multiple truths. And so I can hold that the existence and the formation of the state of Israel for my grandmother as a Holocaust survivor was the fruition of a greatest dream and a sense of hope and like a place to belong after going through, the most horrific crime of the 20th century, alongside the absolute disaster, the Nakba that was for Palestinians. And it's that's just what it is. It's like that was, a displacement and a destruction of families and homes, and it was like my people's, I don't know if liberation is the right word, but having a homeland came at the cost of other people losing a homeland. Yeah. And that, or certainly the homeland in the way that they had known it. And that's very painful. And it's also true. Both parts of it are true.
Yeah. What does home mean to you?
What does home mean to me? I think home means a place where I can be my full, authentic, expressed self. And home, I have many homes. I have homes that, like, home in my body is my first home. For me, as a sound practitioner, home in my voice and in making sound. Home in relationships with people, like with my husband, with many of my close friends. And now I've left New York City. New York City was home really for 21 years. Like, it was truly home and all the experiences I had there. And then it was time to leave. My nervous system no longer wanted to be in that level of stimulation. And so moving to the Hudson Valley and finding home in like the trees and the creek that I walk to every day, it's a very different life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tell me about sound. It's sound therapy, right? Sound.
I do a lot of things. I'm a singer and I call myself a sounder, actually.
Okay.
And and I'm a sound practitioner. So I do, I lead sound journeys. I also use sound as a practice. I run a program called the Creative Fire Circle, which is an embodied creativity circle. And we use vocal release practices, and also like releasing and then receiving sound meditation to support people in calming their nervous system and quieting the inner critic so that they can have access to their authentic creative expression. So, but I have my instruments here, actually. I don't know because I'm not on Zoom, I don't know how to do the settings, but I can try. You can tell me if you hear how it sounds, because normally I would be able to do certain things with the settings, which I don't know how to do on StreamYard. But
no, that's okay. Let's try it.
Can you hear this?
Yeah.
So that is a monolina, and that's a monochord that can actually, when I'm working one-on-one with people, can be placed directly on the body. So I use a lot of different instruments. I use, what's behind me is a gong. I have a North Indian shruti. I have bowls. This little, it's like show and tell right now. This is an amazing, this is like a little chime. So the instruments have different sort of effects, and I use them differently, but they all, in my mind, have this possibility to just bring us more deeply into resonance with our essential frequency.
Wow. I love that. And thank you for giving us a little taste. I felt myself kind of calm.
Oh, good.
Yes, that's wonderful. Where do you learn sound practitioner methods?
Yeah, so there's many schools. I mean, I trained at the Open Center in their program, which is very much like a toe dip into many different teachers. Like I worked with someone who's an expert in tuning forks, and someone who's an expert in voice, like all different. And then it's been like really, I've continued my studies with other practitioners and teachers, and then also just doing the work itself, and also making time to receive the work so you actually experience how it can benefit you. So I do up here in the Hudson Valley, and virtually I have a sound partner that I work with, and we offer live events during the summer, and we like in people's homes, like in their yard. It's really fun. And then we also do I do private work in person, one-on-one, but a lot of my work happens virtually with people as well. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about unlocking, or maybe that's not the right way to say it. So you tell me how to say it, creativity. So what's the connection between sound and creativity?
So for me, I mean, it has to do mostly with first like unblocking and unsticking yourself. I think we carry a lot of emotions. We carry in our body like memories of, I mean, every negative thing that's ever been said. Especially if you're like a sensitive empath and you tend to like take on other people's things, it's all of that stuff can live in us, even simple things. And so using sound, I use first, so I do it like, as I said, I believe in sort of a two-pronged approach, which is like releasing and then receiving. So I like to lead people through a practice with sound, breath, and movement, where they are actually enacting. I'm guiding it, but they're sort of releasing sound, emotion, movement. And people find that it like energizes them, because they're actually taking these things that are kind of like, and they're like loosening them up. And they're very simple practices. And then once they've done that, I have people sort of lie down or move into a more receptive state. And then they're receiving the sound. And as you experience, like, oh, it calmed me down. Or I might lead them through a visualization to connect with their creative muse or their inner, whatever their inner guides are that support them. And then the sound itself, the the sound vibration has this quality of, in my experience, of like calming down the system and bringing you into more of a grounded, present place from which I think it's easier and healthier to create. I also talk a lot about alchemy, and I believe that creative alchemy, and part of the work that I do in Creative Fire Circle is really telling people like, come however you are, if you're in grief, if you're joyful, if you're angry, like, and all of that can be used and alchemized into expression. Is it necessarily going to become a piece of art that gets published or, shown? I don't know. And I don't care. There's time to, I really believe in a separation between the generative brain and the editorial brain. I think it's really, from my process, and I teach this to the people that I work with, I think I think they're both important. Like you need you do need a discerning editorial brain, but if you bring that on too early in the creative process, in my experience, it kills it. Like it doesn't allow you to actually be free, and you're because you're not letting whatever wants to come through you come through. You're kind of like questioning it and blocking it. And yeah, it may not be perfect or ready to be, released into the world, but you at least let it come through you, and then you can take some time away from it, come back to it, check in with it. Then is the time to use your editorial brain and to discern and to make and to craft and to, in my opinion. So, I mean, sometimes poems do come out like fully, very rarely do they come fully formed. And then also I have different, I mean, some poems are more like constructed, you know, and that's a different process if I'm writing in a formal poem. If I'm using, sometimes I'll use like a rhythm or something to inform the language, and that's another way of working. But I still try to get into a state where I'm receptive, where I'm embodied, you know, not just in my head, to enact that kind of work as well.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because we don't often think, or at least I don't often think about my body being connected to my creativity, or at least writing creativity, you know, because it feels like such a cerebral thing, and you can get so bound up in your head that it's hard to create. So the idea of tapping into to listening to your body and sort of adjusting its receptive. I'm making up words today. It's the whiskey talking.
I love it. I mean, words all got invented at one point, so
it's true. Yeah. No, so I'd love that. Actually, this might be a good time to read another poem or to recite.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, your choice.
All right. Let's see. What do I want to read? I'll read one that I think has a real rhythm to it, actually. Invocation for my unborn. Little bird, little invisible, do you feel the pull of my silent song? Little bird, little beating heart, I cut my hands to make a world for you. Come, come, little one, yes, I call for you out loud without shame. Again, I open to the tide of tiny swimmers and pray one reaches center. I've made my heart into a bowl for you, hungry teacher, little grower from between the worlds. I call you with all my breath and muscle, with this body made to fill with you. I call you from my tunneled center, my millions of eggs, any of which could be you. Call with my blood river, my throat and fat hands, with cooking spoon and iron pan. Little one, little bird, I feed with my mouth, particle grown from seed, treasure, little mystery, little all the names I do not know, little you I cannot find in all my folds, little second heartbeat I swear I hear when I stand at the shore, little all the names I've named you in my second tongue, and all your names mean light, little stranger. Greedy bee, your absent wings tickle my womb, little rib formed from my rib, little sexless fish in dark waters, little anchor tossed from the wooden boat of our loving, little poem I do not have the words for, little incantation, come, come, through the sea that knows your names, through black night with its stars for eyes, through the wind and all its directions. Let it blow you home.
Thank you. And there's that home again. It's the theme. Yeah,
that's actually what my sound partner and I call our sound journeys up here. They're called home, a sound journey. It's funny.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Tell us about, it's called, let's see, Mother-Artist Salon.
Yeah. So that was born, well, in a way, it was actually my book release party, because my book came out in October of 2020. So it was a challenging time for a book to come out, because it was sort of in that just past the first wave of the pandemic, before the vaccine. And so I had a virtual book release, and I felt really clear that I wanted it to be all mothers who I was sharing the stage with. So I invited my dear friend, an amazing poet, Mahogany Brown, to be the host. And then I invited 4 visual artists and 4 poets to share work, including my own mother, who passed away about a month and a half ago, and who this book is largely, it's about my journey towards becoming a mother, but it's also about being a daughter. And I really just felt the power of this collective of mothers, like mother artists. It really became like a clear identity that I was like, you know, when I became a mother, I stepped into a different identity, and I want to name it and I want to claim it. And so I really felt, and I felt this Different mother artists are in different places along the spectrum, but I wanted to create a space where we were both uplifting and honoring the work of mother artists. So the salon always features a writer, a mother writer, mother writer monster, and an artist from another discipline. And sometimes, like in the first one, we had a singer as well. And then, but in addition, that's the first aspect, is that we're honoring the work of mother artists and really lifting it up to have a seat at the table, where in so many places it's been sort of pushed aside, denied, and there's a Q&A and a discussion, but there's also prompts so that everyone who's coming has a chance to actually be creative. So it's working so that it's not just you're both receiving and experiencing the work of other mother artists, and anyone's welcome. You don't have to be a mother artist to come. And from the few that we've had, that tends to be our audience. It's like people who are hungry both to see themselves reflected and valued and venerated, but also to have and carve out a space that they can have for 2 hours, once every couple months, to tap into their own creativity and artistry. And, mothers would come breastfeeding their babies. I was like, baby children are welcome. That's another piece. It was like, they can come, yes, if someone's in the middle of reading and they're being distracted, you can turn off your camera, everybody's muted, but they can come, they're included, they're invited, because you don't have to go pay for childcare so that you can be part of this,
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And that goes back to integrating your children into the practice as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which isn't a necessity, but it's, definitely, I think, I don't know. I've done that myself with my daughter, and I think I'm glad that she sees me writing and knows that I talk to other writer mothers during this podcast. And I feel like that sort of brings value to what I'm doing in a way, instead of hiding it or going away and doing your own thing and then coming back and putting on your mom hat. It's like all sort of integrated in a way that's very difficult, but worthwhile, I think.
And I think it's a dance, I think you do still need some time alone without your child to create and to work. And I think it's beautiful, for her to get to see you doing it. And, my son comes in here and he sees my instruments and he gets to play them sometimes, and we really celebrate him when he's come up with like poems. He has written some, he didn't write them because it was before he was writing, but he would say them and we would record them and then say, this is your poem, Surya. This is a poem that you've created. So he already has a sense that that's a possibility and that's something that he can put energy into if he wants to. And that he has, a gift. Oh, that is like perfect timing.
What's up, honey? It turned off. Okay, why don't you come sit with me for a second?
Perfect. On brand.
Here, sit right here.
Brand.
Yes, my little one here. I don't usually show her on camera, so we'll just turn it like this. She was watching a movie downstairs and it turned off, so she needs help turning it back on. You know what we'll do, Elana, if you don't mind? Would you consider reading us another poem?
Absolutely. Will you turn on? Yes, 100%. Yep, I sure will.
Writer motherhood in action. All right.
It's happening right now.
And if I don't pull you back up, I'm still downstairs. Just read us another one.
Perfect. You got it. Well, I think this is a funny one because, in my journey towards becoming a mother, as I mentioned in the book, it's I had some struggles with infertility, and there was this long period of really wanting my son, and you heard it in the last poem. And then once he actually came to be, it was sort of this shock of, wow, this is much harder than I expected. I think we talked a little bit about that. So this poem is sort of a homage to the experience, the reality of actually becoming a mother after wanting to be one so badly. And I'll just share that I remember at the end of my pregnancy, my doula, I was like, oh, I just want to give birth. Like, when is this going to happen? And she was like, honey, don't you worry. Once that baby pops out, you'll be wishing in about 2 weeks that you could send him right back up into your tummy. So this is a poem in honor of that, the reality. It's called Prayer. When you are crying and I don't know why, when I cannot soothe or quiet you, when my nipples are sore and cracked from your merciless mouth, or when you refuse the breast. When I finger the purple stretch marks across my thighs and belly, the loose skin, the blood vessels burst around my eyes and cheeks and asshole, which are because you are. When I stink of puke and milk and shit, when I begin to lose my grown-up words from lack of use, when you push the cup of blended yams I've just prepared on the floor for the third time this week, and it isn't an accident, because you looked right at me before you sent it over the edge of your high chair. When I am on my knees before you, little ruler, begging you to eat, to sleep, to piss in the bowl, let me remember those many nights on my knees, preparing to pray to another God, begging for you to come, for life to take hold inside of me and bloom.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and thank you for saving me there.
Absolutely. I would expect the same from you.
Oh my God.
I think that's perfect. That is like so perfect that she came in, because that's the reality. That's what it is. It's like, I'm doing this thing and my daughter needs me, and if I don't tend to it, it's not, I can't finish this thing. So I have to find a way to do it, and I have to improvise. And I mean, I think that's also the thing, is like the feeling of like you're not alone. I think that the model, you know, again, the model of the lone artist is like you're off doing everything by yourself. And that's also the hero's journey and all this. But it's like, no, I think there's a model where there's like collective support, where because, you know, this is a Zoom version of it, but, you know, we talk about how the kind of grief of the nuclear family and the pressure on the nuclear family, when in the past there were communities and villages. So if you were doing, let's say this wasn't a podcast, but you were doing a teaching or something, you would give your daughter to somebody else to mind for a few hours, and that would just be normal. But that isn't sort of like, there isn't a lot of that kind of support in our current model.
No, it's true. And that's why it's so important, I think, to model for each other and to model for the next generations, plural.
Yeah.
I always, in meetings when my daughter is home with me, I'll make sure that I have my camera on, and like if she's sitting there or she's in the background or doing, I'll be like, sorry, I have to, you know, go get her a snack or whatever it is. And it's important for, you know, young female employees to see their boss like struggling a little bit sometimes.
Well, and do you remember in the beginning of the pandemic, I can't remember who, it was like a famous news anchor or something who was like doing Zoom, and his kid like ran through the thing, and I was like, yes, like fuck yes, like because that's actually real, and TV is fake, and like nobody looks that way. Like they have makeup, and you know, you don't get to see them at home with their dog and their kid, and you know, and so I know some people are like extremely uncomfortable about like how much has had to be revealed in the pandemic age, but I'm also like, I'm for it. I'm like, it's actually collapsing the veils of illusion. And I'm like more please, like more authenticity, more reality, less like separation, you know, more integration. I'm a fan of that.
Oh yeah, I hope it lasts, you know, like as we knock on everything that's would come out of the pandemic, I hope that sticks around, that collapsing of the veil, because it is important, and it helps build community, I think, when you see each other's imperfections and each other's mess, and you know, it's like you said, it's real, it's life. Yeah. I think we have just a few minutes. I'm going to give you a choice. If you'd like to read another poem, or maybe sound us out with a sound exercise.
Ooh,
up to you.
You know what I really want to do, and it might take too long, but I really want to read the Ariel Gore quote about like Diane de Prima.
Please do.
It's long. It's like a little story. Can I read it? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because I just feel like that is really the epitome of what we're talking about. So this was in, Ariel Gore writes about this, and she's writing about, in Recollections of My Life as a Woman, the poet Diane de Prima tells of a night at Allen Ginsberg's place in New York. She'd gotten a friend to babysit her young daughter and headed over to Ginsberg's apartment because Jack Kerouac and Philip Whalen were in town for, quote, one of those nights with lots of important, intense talk about writing you don't remember later. Well, Diane had promised her babysitter that she'd be back at 11:30 that night, and 11:30 starts rolling around, so Diane bids her farewells, whereupon Kerouac raised himself up on one elbow on the linoleum and announced in a stentorian voice, "De Prima, unless you forget about your babysitter, you're never going to be a writer." How do you like that? Kerouac just props himself up with one arm and drunkenly slaps us with what the great fear we all share. He embodies the archetype of the selfish, self-destructive male artist, and he announces that unless we too are willing to be irresponsible to our relationships, we'll never quite measure up. I considered this carefully then and later, De Prima writes, and allowed that at least part of me thought he was right, but nevertheless, I got up and went home. I'd given my word to a friend, she explains, and I would keep it. Maybe I was never going to be a writer, but I had to risk it. That was a risk that was hidden like a Chinese puzzle inside the other risk of, can I be a single mom and be a poet? A serious question, that one. Serious not only for moms, but for all of us. Can we be present in our relationships and still do the work we feel called to do? It's like my friend Lynn says, a woman has to make a real effort not to dissolve into everything that needs her. Our relationships need us, but we don't want to dissolve. We refuse to dissolve, but we also choose to be responsible to our relationships. We're tired of the drunk guy on the linoleum telling us we can't do both. Women have always done both. Looking back, De Prima recognizes what is true. Had she opted to stay out that night, quote, there would be no poems. That is, the person who would have left a friend hanging who had done her a favor also wouldn't have stuck through the thick and thin to the business of making poems. It is the same discipline throughout. So I just feel like that's important.
Yeah. That was really important and worth the extra couple minutes. It wasn't even that long. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us, Elana. This was just great.
My pleasure and honor. And thank you so much for having me. And thank you for doing this. Thank you for making a space for Writer Mother Monsters to talk about, you know, the reality of both of these things and how we hold these two things that we care so deeply about. It's a really, really, I know it's a labor of love for you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Stick around after I remove you from the stream.
Okay.
I can say goodbye. And thank you so much. Come back when your next book comes out.
Yeah, for sure.
Then.
My next book is like even more taboo.
Oh, wait. Can you say like the one, can you give us the elevator pitch?
Yes, its working title is The Desire Papers, and it's about the domestication of female desire.
Okay, so for everyone listening, I'm going to get to hear more about this. But you have to come back and listen to the next conversation when this book comes out.
Maybe in 10 years. No, not 10. My book came out in 2020, in about 8 years.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's only going in 8 years. I think
totally.
I can keep this going. Thank you so much, Elana. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And you can watch this video and listen to the audio on writermothermonster.com within a couple days. Again, a special thanks to our sponsors and patrons whose support helps make this show possible. If you enjoy the episode, please becoming one of them to help keep this podcast going. And you can look for details at writermothermonster.com. So thank you again. Have a good night. And until next time.